Good morning, class. This is Mr. Plums. We are here taking notes. The class is Enriched Algebra 2. We are working our way through Unit 10. These notes are for 10B solving. Okay. There's three types of equations we're going to solve in this worksheet. X squared, quadratics, absolute value, and square root. You should be able to solve these three types of problems by the end of today. All right. Quadratics, we've solved earlier this year. This was back semester 1, unit 2 and 3. We've worked on quadratics, graphing parabolas, things like that. So hopefully this looks vaguely familiar. The first one, okay, to solve quadratics, the strategies are, if there's no x term, by an x term, I mean this, like 3x. There's no x term here, there's just an x squared if you were to FOIL this out. So if there's no x term, you want the term that's squared by itself, and then you square root both sides. Otherwise, we'll set it equal to 0 and factor. Remember that we can always use the quadratic formula. However, that's the hardest, most error-prone method, so we'll try the others first. Okay, so let's try the first problem. We have x minus 3 squared minus 12 equals 0. We want the thing that's squared by itself, so we will add 12 to both sides. Now we will get, excuse me, now we will get x minus 3 squared equals 12. Now we will square root both sides. The square root and the square cancel. We'll get x minus 3 equals. Now, one tricky thing about this method is right here. Don't forget your plus or minus. The square root of 12. The plus or minus comes from this side. A positive squared and a negative squared, remember, are the same thing. Now we will add 3 to both sides. And we get x equals 3 plus or minus the square root of 12. Now, the square root of 12, we can simplify. We can think of that as 4 times 3, and the square root of 4 comes out as a 2. So our final answer is now 3 plus or minus 2 square root of 3. The next problem we have, problem 2. Here there's an x squared and an x term. So in this one, we want to set it equal to 0. Because square rooting both sides won't work, we'll end up with the square root of x and then get stuck. So what we will want to do, you want your x squared to remain positive. So we'll add x to both sides. And I'll subtract 8 from both sides at the same time to save a step. So those cancel. And I get x squared minus 2x minus 8 equals 0. All right, now in this right here, I can try to factor. If that doesn't work, I can use the quadratic formula. So first I'll try to factor it. I get x times x is x squared. Now I think to myself, what times what is 8 that might add to 2? All right, so 4 times 2 is 8. Now, I'll check my signs last. So the 2 comes from the inner plus the outer, 4x and 2x. So I want the 4 to be negative and the 2 to be positive. So then negative 4 plus 2 is negative 2. So everything works out. Now I can try to figure out what makes this part 0 and what makes this part 0. Because 0 times any number is 0. So what makes x minus 4 0? X would equal 4. What makes x plus 2 0? X equals negative 2. All right, that's that one. Now the next one. Okay, there's an x squared and an x term. This is the kind where I want it equal to 0. Because square rooting both sides won't work. I'll get the square root of x and get stuck. So what I'll want to do is subtract 8x from both sides. So I get 4x squared minus 8x equals 0. Now I can try to solve by factoring. All right, there's only two terms. Now, the two type of parenthesis method is more common, but don't forget about trying to factor using only one parenthesis. If you look at these two terms, what's in common between the terms is a 4 and an x, which you can factor out using one parenthesis. And then what's left is x. 4x times x is 4x squared minus 2. 4x times 2 is the 8x. Now that I have two parentheses, I can think what makes this 0? Because 0 times any number is 0. So what makes 4x 0? And what makes x minus 2 0? Okay, so this one I can divide by both sides by 4. 4 goes into 0, 0 times. Add 2, and x equals 2. So those are my two answers, 0 and 2. All right. So notice we didn't have to use the quadratic formula for any of these. All right, now we'll go on to solving absolute value problems. Okay, if you think about this one, the absolute value of what number is 5? Well, the absolute value of 5 is 5, and the absolute value of negative 5 is also 5. Okay, so the two answers are 5 and negative 5. So this is the strategy we'll use to solve all of these problems. So the absolute value can either be a positive or a negative. So on this one, the absolute value of 5 is 5. So x minus 2 is 5. Or the absolute value of negative 5 is also 5. So if x minus 2 were equal to negative 5, the absolute value of that is also 5. So now we have two individual algebra problems that we can solve. So this one, we will add 2 to both sides, getting 7. And this one, we will add 2 to both sides, getting negative 3. Okay, we can use the same strategy on this problem. It's just harder. So the absolute value is by itself, so we are ready to split it into its positive and negative cases. So the positive and negative cases, we would be happy if 2x plus 4 equaled x plus 5, and we'd be happy if 2x plus 4 equaled the negative of x plus 5. Notice I had to put this in parentheses because it's the negative of the whole side. All right, now we have two separate algebra problems to solve. This one, we could subtract x from both sides, getting x plus 4 equals 5. And then we could subtract 4 and get 1. Over here, the first thing we have to do is distribute our negative. So we have 2x plus 4 equals negative x plus 5. Oh, sorry, minus 5. We will add x to both sides. We'll get 3x plus 4 equals negative 5. We will subtract 4 from both sides, getting 3x equals negative 9, and divide by 3, getting x equals negative 3. Now, occasionally in these problems, both answers won't work. Because if you plug in negative 3 here, and this is negative, you can't take the absolute value of something and get a negative answer. So if there are two answers, these are it. But there's a chance that one of these doesn't work. So we will check them. So plug in 1. 2 times 1 is 2. So we have 2 plus 4 equals, this side will plug in 1. 1 plus 5. So now we have the absolute value of 6 equals 6. Oh my, this one works. Okay, the negative 3. Okay, negative 3 times 2 is negative 6 plus 4. Does that equal negative 3 plus 2? Negative 6 plus 4 is negative 2. Now, does the absolute value of negative 2 equal negative 3 plus 2? Oh, I'm sorry, that should have been plus 5. Negative 3 plus 5. Negative 3 plus 5 is 2. The absolute value of negative 2 does equal 2. Yes, this one also works. Okay. So that was a 5 there. Now the last one, the absolute value is not by itself. So here, we will add 3 to both sides. We want the absolute value by itself. So we get 1/2 times the absolute value of x plus 3 equals 8. Now we'll multiply both sides by 4. I'm sorry, by 2. Those will cancel. So we get the absolute value of x plus 3 equals 16. Now the absolute value is by itself, so we'll split it into its positive and negative cases. So x plus 3 could equal 16 and negative 16. Subtract 3 from both sides. X is 13. Subtract 3 from both sides. And x is negative 19. Now both of these answers will work, because if you plug one in, it doesn't give a negative value on this side. So I'm not going to take the time to check both of these values, because negative 9 plus 3 is negative 16. The absolute value of negative 16 is 16. And 13 plus 3 is also 16. So we don't have any problems with this one working. Okay, the last 3. Okay, solving square root problems. Okay, we want the square root by itself, and then we'll square both sides. So we could square both sides now, but then the 2 makes things a little more complicated. All right, so what we're going to want to do is divide both sides by 2. So we get the square root of x minus 3 equals 4. Now the square root's by itself, so now we'll square both sides. And we get x minus 3 equals 16. We will add 3 and get 19. And I did not forget the plus or minus in this problem. So if I plug in 19, 19 minus 3 is 60. The square root of 16 is 4. The square root of negative 16 is imaginary. So we don't need a plus or minus here. Okay, the next one. The square root is by itself, so we will square both sides. So x plus 2 equals. Now, x plus 3 squared means x plus 3 times x plus 3. We cannot square both terms and get the correct answer. Squaring both terms is not a valid shortcut. The correct answer is x times x is x squared. X times 3 is 3x. 3, so I did x times x was x squared. X times 3 was 3x. 3 times x is 3x. And 3 times 3 is 9. Now the 3x and the 3x are 6x. Okay, now I want it equal to 0 because there's an x squared and an x term. So I want to subtract x and subtract 2 from both sides. I want to subtract x and subtract 2. So I get 0 equals x squared plus 5x plus 7. Now that it's equal to 0, I can try and factor. 7 times 1 is 7, which does not add up to 5. So this one, if it's not factorable, I can use the quadratic formula. All right, so the quadratic formula. A is 1, B is 5, and C is 7. The quadratic formula was negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right, so I have negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 5 squared minus 4 times 1 times 7 all over 2a. 2 times 1 is 2. So remember, this is where you have to be careful of not mixing up your signs or making a mistake. So I have negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 25 minus 28 all over 2. So I get negative 5 plus or minus the square root. 25 minus 28 is negative 3. And the square root of a negative is I. So that's your final answer. This was considered a hard problem, by the way. For this unit, problems won't get much harder than that, thankfully. That was a tricky one. Okay, this one, I want to get the cube by itself, so I'll divide both sides by 2, getting x plus 3 cubed equals negative 8. Now, I will cube root. So I want to get rid of my cube by cube rooting. So the cube root and the cube cancel, and I'm left with x plus 3 equals. Now, the cube root of negative 8, what times what is negative 8? So negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 2, 4. Positive 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. So that's negative 2. Subtract 3, and you get negative 5.
That was it, everybody. That is the different types of solving. Okay, so what's the summary? So basically, if you have a thing that's squared, you want it by itself, and then you square root it. If you have an absolute value, you want it by itself, and then you split it into its positive and negative cases. If you have a square root, you want it by itself, and then you square both sides. If you have a cubic, you want it by itself, and then you cube root both sides. The only time the plus or minus pops up is in the quadratic. If you square root both sides, the plus or minus pops up. Okay, so good luck on your practice problems. The answers are provided. Make sure you try the problems, look back at your notes, and think carefully. Good luck.